In this video, we'll take a look at the session object and how it provides a storage mechanism for each individual user that comes to your website. The session object is one way in which ASP.NET gives you the capability of making a stateful application out of a typically stateless environment such as the Internet. But because this is probably a concept that's easier to show you than to explain to you, what I've done is create a sample application that will allow us to type some values into this text box, and then when we click the Set Session button, whatever we typed in the text box will be put into a session object. And we can go to different pages within our application to see that that value is carried from page to page without the use of a HTTP post or GET, without the use of a cookie, without the use of a query string. But it's rather saved in the ASP.NET worker process in its memory space so that the next time that the user comes and interacts with that page, those values will still be available to your page that processes them. Let's take a look at the code behind this button in order to take a better look at and understand how to grab information from the session object and to set values into the session object. And to do this, we're going to take a look primarily at this button to click event and see here that we've basically called the session object, and then we've created a key that we're calling session setting, and we're setting this value within the session object equal to whatever was typed into the text box. Then, in order to retrieve that information, what we're doing is using a label and setting its text property equal to the value of the session object's session setting key that we just set in the previous line. So to demonstrate how this works, what I'm going to do is open up an instance of Internet Explorer, and I'm going to navigate to this page. And when it finishes loading, we see our web page come up, okay? And what we're going to do is type in my session value, hit set session, and when we do, we'll notice that the current value of our session variable is set to my session value. Now, as I use subsequent pages within my application, for example, I'm going to click on a different page that I've created that will display the value of the session variable. And notice that it also lists my session value. Now, how long will this value stay in memory? Well, that is configurable. By default, it's about 20 minutes. However, if you change configuration in the web.config file, you can keep it longer or shorter as your requirements or your hardware requirements dictate. So what we're going to do is simulate that we end this session and we start a new session just to make sure that the values stored in this session are not persisted over to somebody else's session. So what we'll do is close down the browser, and we'll open up the browser again. And when we do, notice that there is nothing now in the current value of the session variable. And that's correct. By design, we don't want somebody else coming in later and grabbing the value from that session. That was created for somebody else who came to the site a little while ago. Now, if you're familiar with classic ASP, the use of the session object was considered a major faux pas, and the reason for that was it could cause significant memory problems by there either being too many people come to the site and storing too much information within the session object, or some people even tried to store entire objects into the session, and that caused a very unstable environment. But it was also a problem because there was no web farm support. In other words, if you had a web server farm with 10, 15 servers, and you set a session variable on one server, but then because of the way the web farm works, the next time you request a page, you're sent to a different web server within that same server farm, there was no way to get the values back from the original server because they are stored on a server by server basis. Also, another problem was that if you didn't support cookies, you could sometimes run into problems. So if you didn't have cookies set on your browser and you went to a web page that required the use of sessions, then the application would sometimes break. Now that was addressed to some extent in future versions of Internet Information Services, but for the most part, it wasn't a good idea to use session objects. However, those problems have all been corrected with ASP.NET. As we'll see in a future video, how to configure the use of a session object so that it can be the values that are within the session object can be stored off across a web farm, can be stored off in SQL Server, or we'll also learn how to use cookieless mode for our session objects so that they don't require the use of cookies. But at any rate, we hope you enjoyed this video and that it was informative and that you won't be afraid to use a session object in the future. Thank you.